So the topic I wanted to talk about, since you're entrepreneurs, was to try to get into this whole idea of behavioral design and behavioral change. Behavior design has been around for about, you know, 20 years as a term, and much less as a profession. In fact, I think the profession is only getting shaped now. There's I think one other behavioral designer of Finnish origin in Finland who dares to call themselves a behavioral designer. I have been calling myself this from about 7 years, and or almost, yeah, 7 years, and I've been constantly changing what it means to be a behavioral designer. So I've literally been faking it till I make it, and the story continues. So I just want to take you through the journey of what I am doing in this area, why I think behavior design is important, and why it's going to be pretty important, and especially its relevance for entrepreneurs. So uh, the this is like a CB Insights is a large research company, and this is like a list of factors of why startups fail. This is from, they do extensive research, and if you look at the one I've highlighted, poor marketing is somewhere deep down in the list. Um, Typically, a lot of people in business think that it's of marketing or good marketing that causes products or startups to fail, but this is actually way down the list. Would you be able to guess? Can anyone guess what would be at top? What's at the top of the list of failed startups?
Can it be like maybe bad team or something regarding the team?
Bad team is absolutely a good. Now I can see your chat, so you can type stuff at me. Bad team is absolutely a good guess. It's not right at the top, however.
I think that is like kind of resistant for change.
That you're getting very close. In fact, I would like to put it that way as well. A resistance by whom and for what kind of change? Could you be more specific?
Like resistant from maybe from the owner, from the team as well.
That's actually a really good point. It's, however, still not right at the top. Typical. So when you go to hackathons and you're trying to build a product, what do all the mentors try to tell you? The first thing they try to get to tell you in your hackathon or startup weekend or whatever, what is it they're always trying to tell you? Right? Well, they're basically always trying to tell you, what is the problem you are solving? Right? What is the need? And more than 50% of startups actually fail because there is no market need for what they're building. And that's so obvious, it's so dumb a reason to be on top, but it is still 50% of the reason. My network connection is unstable. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So great. So no market need, huge problem. And it's a variation of what one of you said, which was there is a change resistance, except that this change resistance is on the part of the customer. It's either the offer, your product, your service that you're offering, they don't experience a need that your product meets, or they are unwilling to change in some other way. And really, this need thing is a big deal, because I think that in today's world, when you have customer need, when you have a market need in place, everything else can follow. All these other reasons: ran out of cash. That means, well, there was a market need, but you couldn't serve it. You ran out of cash, and hence the failure. The team wasn't right. Way up there, good answer, that one. But that means there was still some need. Maybe there was a need, but then the team wasn't able to execute. Got out competed. That definitely means that there was a need, and other competitors were better at serving that need, and so on, right? So if you look at this whole problem of understanding what is the need of the market, especially in a digital world, you basically have this huge gap between what customers say on the left and what customers actually do. And it's a problem with surveys, the problem, like just like now you said, we're going to have a survey. Well, when you ask people something and you ask them to respond through words and through intentions, you will never, you'll get something, but it could be very close or very far away from what they actually do. from the action they actually take. So the world of saying looks something like this: I love you so much that I miss you when I close my eyes to blink, right? But that's what the customer might say, and you might feel like, wow, I really have a interesting product or an interesting business here. But what you end up when you actually ask customers to do something is that you end up in the situation on the right, poor Liam Neeson saying, "Do you want to churn? I will find you and I will retain you," right? So that's most product managers who launched a product. They're just, I mean, desperately watching customer churn, which is the rate of customers leaving your product, abandoning your product, or not being active inside your product. And therefore, over time, we've had these mechanisms called lock-in mechanisms, right? Microsoft did that through licensing. They made sure they went to the guy who made PCs, IBM, and told them, look, for every PC you sell, you will put Microsoft in there. So they made sure that if people used a PC, they used Microsoft Office. And that's why the software was so bad, and it remains bad because they didn't, the product wasn't used because people wanted to use them, people had to use them, right? So other ways of lock-in are what device systems, ecosystems try to do right now. All kinds of long-term subscription models. All of these are trying to prevent this problem where you have someone who says they like you, but then at some point they're leaving. So how do you lock them in? And the problem is this lock-in is going to get harder and harder because the switching costs are becoming cheaper. Data portability becomes cheaper. The cloud makes your data available anywhere. Imagine if all of the data that you put into Facebook was actually, the law made it so that because of privacy concerns, all of that data should sit somewhere within a government server somewhere, which you can port to another social network whenever you want it. And that's what's happening to the banks right now. All of your banking data is yours. If you tell your bank tomorrow, I want to move my data out of Danske Bank and throw it into a startup, it's totally possible, right? And that's why the banks are so scared. So these lock-in mechanisms are going away. And therefore, the churn problem becomes really more and more important. So what do we do in this scenario? The only way to get people to use your product, the only way to have, to meet the needs of people is to actually get them to use your product. And usage becomes super critical. As designers, as entrepreneurs, the key thing we need to focus on is having the product used. This is true for B2C, where you have a direct relationship with the customer, but it's also any questions until this point? Am I making sense? I can't get any feedback.
Yeah, I think I am kind of following it. It's just sometimes the network connection is quite unstable. So
I'm terribly
if you
sorry.
turn off your camera, maybe it helps.
All right, let me do that.
I will also turn off mine.
No worries. Okay, very good. All right. Great. Good stuff. Yeah.
I have a question.
So, yep, hit me.
So you mentioned that the market need is the number one reason why lots of startups are failing and having issues. I'm curious, like, for example, iPad, Tesla, these are major market successes despite that there was no apparent need for the product. So I'm wondering how does, like, are we going in different directions or are we talking about the same?
I think we're talking about different things because need, if you look at the etymological sense of the word, it means, oh, I'm missing something and can you fulfill it for me, right? Hunger. But
Yeah.
Tesla absolutely provides for a need, which is stylish automobile ownership. I mean, which they did for cars, what iPhone did for personal technology. There is always a need for luxury. The moment people have their basic needs met and their social needs met, they need to feel good about themselves. And they do it through cars, they do it through phones, they do it through jewelry, they do it through expensive vacations and yachts. So Tesla absolutely taps into that need. But there is no, in fact, that's the whole interesting thing, is that other companies couldn't anticipate that there existed a need for that, for a segment up there, a premium segment, which would buy more expensive cars, which were not necessarily, well, and engineering wise, I've never owned a Tesla, but I've heard it's also really good.
Yeah,
So,
it's a different generation of car. It's like, so there is already well-established car market, and so how did they come up? Like, is there a method to understand the market need, or is there like a?
well, that is not the topic of my particular drift here, unfortunately. But typically, if you look at consumer behavior and try to understand marketing itself, then I think you'll find your answers in there. But that was just for me a starting point to actually move into usage. The point I'm trying to make is that a Tesla can be, let's say they've done very good market research and figured out that this premium car exists. I mean, the need for this premium car, cool car, green car, all of it in one, right? Designed by an iconic, or put together by an iconic founder who also launches space shuttles. There is a psychological need for that. They figured that out. Let's say they designed the car, they even got the channel relationships to put the car out in the market. My point is, if people don't, not just buy the car, if they don't drive the car and they don't send that data back to Tesla about usage, they don't use the apps on the car's dashboard, and if they don't recommend that car, if they don't call their friends and say, hey, you want to go for a ride in my Tesla, and therefore get other people to buy it, those principles of usage are so important that all of the other stuff doesn't really end up getting you a business unless you have usage. And my basic thesis is usage and behavior are the same, and that's where behavior design comes in. So that's where I'm going.
Okay. Fair enough.
Great. So this is Ashwin Rajan. You guys must have heard of him. He's NYU Stern professor, I think. And he's one of the guys who's been thinking a lot about valuation for a long time. And for some years now, he's already been working in the area of valuation of companies based on usage. And this is a talk I definitely recommend, where he goes into user-based valuation. So this movement of valuing a company from users is also becoming quite strong in the business school and the academic domain, which is quite a shift, because essentially the whole usage-based valuation is a much more of a venture capital sort of approach. It started much more in the venture capital world. Anyways, so let's look at some examples of usage, right? If you look at this app here, it's called Sync Division. I recently downloaded it. Advanced relaxation program. I just want to run through a few examples with no particular point in mind, just to kind of go through this whole issue of usage. So I download this app, and the setup says continue with Facebook, Google, or sign up. Very nice advanced relaxation program. I've heard about it. And the moment I actually say continue with Google, it says connect a Google Fit. Of course, it gives me the option to skip it. But you see what's happening here. It's already prompted me to use the app here on this home screen, or the landing page. And then it further prompts me to connect another device, which I don't have, and creates this sort of barrier to use it. So the example of how this is a prompt that comes too early. I think users would be much more happy to go into the app, start using it, and after they have some proof of the pudding, then they actually have, then if you prompt the user and say, would you want to connect to a Google Fit, then possibly that becomes interesting. Another example here, if you start looking at your products and services, try to look at where the product usage is being driven and what else is supporting that. For example, on this screen, the audible sample here is where usage is being driven, where it's essentially asking you to try something for free and quickly and right here, rather than, and then of course, this is of course the other big usage point, the call to action. right? Everything else just supports that. So all of this information supports that. This is a mechanism called social proof, which also supports that. On a screen like this, for example, you have actually much less driving towards usage. And if we had to think about the screen from a behavior design perspective, we'd think about what behaviors is this interface driving. So I see that a couple of there's her skills. I can possibly follow this researcher. And there are a couple of other unrelated things. But what else is DevPost actually doing to drive my usage here? That's an open question, okay? Whereas SoundCloud, on the other hand, simple, sweet, it kind of communicates that you already bought into the brand. It's not trying to drive my usage. And here it just is, it's trying to ask some information from me in order to get me to progress. I'm just trying to show you some different examples. Pokemon Go. Well, if you look at this, there's an explicit, this whole screen is designed to get you to use the app more, because not only everything here is a call to action, you see. Check out a Pokestop or try to move in the real world and move your avatar. So there's this attempt at getting you to customize the app. And then also this let's go clear call to action to either try this or something else. Sorry. Mural is a very nice online SaaS based tool, and they help you create mood boards and stuff. So this is their onboarding screen where they show you, they're trying to figure out what problem you would like to solve with this app, with this service. And that's also basically driving you towards usage while telling the company more about you. And on the other hand, there are lots of interfaces and screens where there's absolutely no drive towards usage whatsoever. This is a typical Android home screen. And the problem with the screen is, one of the problems with the platform is that the only thing you can do to drive usage at this stage is to provide some sort of a notification, right? But what if there were better mechanisms for these apps? This screen is full of apps that have been downloaded onto the phone for about a week. And if you don't go into any of those apps, they absolutely do not prompt any usage on your part. So that's a lot of opportunity for usage just totally lost. Google Music has gone premium, or YouTube Music, and it's trying to do the same thing, same game as what Netflix and the others are playing, which is anticipate user taste, customize user preferences, and then cluster them with other users and try to serve them something that brings them back or makes the app valuable for them. Where the call to actions here are, try to take the user down the journey where you say, how would you customize this product, but also try to show based on other users' behavior and data, what's going on and some of the cool starting points down this journey. So essentially what happens is that successful digital products, when you think about them, they essentially transform what users do. If you look at what happened to photography, hello. Oh.
We hear you, but can you say something?
Hi. I'm just checking. Okay, very good.
Yeah, it's okay.
So great. So if you look at what happens before, if you look at what happens before digital and after digital in a particular space, before digital in photography, you essentially had a very different set of behaviors. You had people who would shoot, people who would develop. You had the user would shoot a photograph, he would develop a photograph, would display the picture and store the picture. But after digital, essentially, you had, shooting and editing on the fly, sharing pretty much immediately, and then commenting. And photography behaviors with Instagram and others became social, and they became instantaneous. Very different set of behaviors from pre-digital. Voice interfaces are trying to change our behaviors around shopping, for example, where currently you would walk and browse products in a mall or in a shop, pick up the products, you would pay and carry the products back home. But really after digital, you have the chat experience is where the purchase opportunity comes in. You could have this product having you prompt to pay or to order, and then actually you might use the product and rate it directly on a chat interface as well. So your shopping behaviors might be transformed through the use of this new product conversational UI. And then health behaviors, I think the Apple Watch is like a key health behavior moderator, because before you had a totally set of behaviors, before you had this live sensor, pretty much health sensor on your wrist, where you would self-diagnose that you had a problem, probably schedule an appointment with the doctor, consult the doctor, and medicate yourself based on the doctor's prescriptions. But now you buy the watch, you wear it, you refer to it, and you improve, and it probably preempts or suggests. There is now an app on the Apple Watch which actually can preempt or predict to some degree, I think, of success if a person is likely to develop dementia, which is so crazy, just completely crazy. But things are getting out there. So being able to anticipate health problems and driving your behavior. And so essentially, when we think of technology, we need to see that technology is not something static. It's something that changes, driven by behavior, and behavior changes, human behavior changes continuously, driven by technology, and they adapt each other. So you sort of have this continuum of stuff, this merger of these two things that takes the whole industry and pretty much all of technology-based society forward. And that's why I think that we are all in the business of driving human behavioral change. Of course, this is a very technology-centric presentation. I have a couple of examples from the impact nonprofit world as well. But all business, all enterprise, all impact, all government, whatever it is that you might do as part of an organization, human behavioral change is a dimension that unfortunately or fortunately you will be unable to ignore. Any questions at this point? You could use the chat. No questions yet. Nice. So I'm just going to assume that this is sounding all right so far. Okay. So when I first started investigating behavior design, I looked at it from a typical disruption sort of a view. And one of the first things I investigated is kind of captured in this slide. It's a very old slide with my old logo here. But essentially, the first kind of realization or work that we did was around the idea of behavioral disruption. And typically when you think of disruption in today's world, we kind of see it as technology being disrupted, but actually it is behavior that's disrupted. Just like in the examples I showed above, it's how we order food, it's how we take photographs, it's how we travel, it's how we meet and start relationships with other people. It's these things, it's those behaviors that are disrupted by technology, and successful technologies actually end up disrupting behavior permanently. And this is a sort of three-stage model that we'd come up with many years ago. Well, actually, I came up with this. When I say we, I mostly mean me, because in most of these cases, I'm an independent researcher working with a few other collaborators from time to time. And this is based on a lot of three-stage disruption models that you might find elsewhere in disruption literature. But really what I'm trying to say here is that the first stage, if you look at, say, the transition to streaming, remember the time when we had CDs and we had tapes before that, cassettes, and then we had CDs. Well, there were LPs before all of that, I guess. And you actually owned music at some point. You kind of bought music as a product, an album, and you actually owned it. And then you could give it to whoever you liked. And otherwise it just sat around in your home. But that behavior, that whole series of behaviors got entirely disrupted by streaming music. And today we don't even think about it. We take it for granted that we just stream what we like. We pay for what we like online and we stream it. And we don't give a second thought to owning it, because the whole hassle of storing and managing and sorting and carrying, all of that has been done away with by the streaming, the shift to streaming. So there's obviously been downsides and upsides to that. But typically, if you look at what happens in this sort of a behavioral disruption, you see three things or three stages. You see the first stage where trial is done, where the current human behavior meets and tests the new technology. So you have people who don't stream or nobody streams, and a few people are trying it out for the first time. And then you have this really tricky stage called transition, which can happen overnight in some cases. In the case of some behavioral disruption, like movement to all digital cash, which happened in India. There's a sudden transition for a number of reasons to digital cash from hard cash. This transition stage, going from one previous set of behaviors to a new set of behaviors, it can be short or long. It can be based on a number of factors, but that's a stage where the behavior changes, the human behavior starts to change to adapt to the technology. And if that doesn't happen, the technology is basically rejected. That's why you have that 90% plus startup failure rate, and you have these companies not meeting a market need. It's basically whatever they're proposing is rejected. It's not changing behavior. And the third is this grand, awesome stage of transformation, where if there's a new behavior that is formed using your technology, your product or service as an extension, then we suddenly, in a new world, you suddenly have mass market shift towards something like streaming, and then you have all kinds of new products and services competing for that market, and suddenly people who buy products, buy music, seem like a relic. That's one view, which is the kind of the disruption life cycle view. The other view of thinking about behavioral change is the final mile view, which comes from behavioral economics. The final mile is, and all of these, I use all of these in my work really, but it's important to get a sense of how these different things work. The final mile sees that the world is just full of opportunities. I mean, all the products, services, impact organizations, whatever you might create, all of these are opportunities, but really the final mile is behavior change. So if people don't, if you can't get people to change their behavior, then you really won't have the kind of impact that all of these things are seeking to do. That's the reason it's been referred to as the final mile. It's quite popular, that view. This is, for example, a good example of the final mile, where you have, how do you get people, car owners, to use public transport? You have the facility of public transport available, yet you can't get people to switch and use public transport. That's a behavior change problem. You have this problem, and I think it's also possible in the Nordics that the numbers are quite high, that you have people who purchase, you actually have a membership that's paid for, sitting there possibly for the whole year, and then you can't, how do you get customers to go and use the gym? That's a behavior change problem. Also, in other parts of the world, you might have issues such as how to get kids to actually stay in school. You have the schools, and the kids have the opportunity to actually go to school, but how do you actually get them to change their behavior to stay there? Or how do you get the society to change its behavior? All of these are final mile problems. This is another more recent final mile problem, is how do you get citizens to get tested in the case of the current crisis, right? All behavior change problems. So we had the long-term transformation, disruption view. Then we had the final mile view, and now I want to look at what is closer to my work, which is behavior design, right? Any questions at this point? Just don't want to rush too far.
I have another question.
Please.
Ashwin, are you using Bluetooth headset or something?
No, I'm actually using a wired headset just to be sure that it wasn't breaking.
Okay.
Yeah,
It felt like that the noise takes up and then it breaks after a while, but then it gets better again. So it's very Bluetooth behavior.
No, actually my headset is plugged in.
Okay.
Should I try disconnecting and try connecting again?
No, I think it's fine then. It's never a bad interruption. Yeah.
Okay. So if it's broken anywhere, just send me a quick text. I can look at it here.
Okay.
Yeah. The third is behavior design. Let's get into it, right? You saw that the final mile essentially looked at this whole issue of how do you bridge that final mile, and the thing that I think is very important about behavior design is that it tries to move people into action. You're trying to actually design behaviors, and there may be a lot of situations where people have made a decision to do something. The user might make a decision to do something, but then they actually delay and could take a lot of time to act on it. You can see this maybe in the case of maybe romance, where someone has decided to actually propose to their loved one, their sweetheart, and the decision has been made, but when and how to propose, and the timing of that, the action from based on that decision could take quite a while. It could be quite well thought through or not thought through. And why is that this gap between decision making and action, and why do we see it, and how do we actually facilitate people to take action and drive behavior? And that's, I think, the core of behavior design. It draws on decision science, behavioral economics, all of that, but it's most concerned with the moment of action and actually designing human action. So I saw this, I took this as an example. I've seen here that there are about 11 reactions to my post, right? My question is, this is my post from, XES post from yesterday or this week about my talk. There are 11 people who liked it. And my question is, why did not any of these people actually send me a LinkedIn request? It would be interesting if I could hear some answers. And this is not a test, I'm just curious.
I think I have already.
Good. So, yeah, it doesn't apply to you then, I guess.
I have an idea actually, because I think myself, I haven't sent you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it okay if I'm talking instead of writing?
Yes. No, please talk, because it's actually quite eerie for me to be looking at nobody, and I don't even know if anyone's there.
Now that I'm thinking that why I haven't sent you a request, I like the post, but then I kind of I didn't feel that I was there was no call to action that, send the request to Ashwin or reach out to him or something. I feel
exactly. I think you nailed it on the head. And actually, I think you can probably get answers from these 11 people across a spectrum, right? You'll have some people who say, I didn't have the time. I just quickly liked the post when I was on, probably wasn't on the metro yesterday or this week, but they were out walking their dog. They didn't have the possibility. Some others like you didn't actually find the opportunity within that interface to do it. And a few others probably didn't think about it. But all of these are, that's exactly the behavioral design problem, where there might have been the motivation, there might have been even the intention, but somehow there was a gap. There might even have been the decision, but somehow there was a gap towards action. And that's where the work of behavior design truly is where the rubber meets the road, where you try to figure out how do we drive those sorts of behaviors that might be beneficial to people and to business, right? Even though here you have a few cool, interesting like comments that LinkedIn is trying to prompt you to share. But the problem with these comments is you haven't yet been to the event. It's just an ad for the event. So helpful, that won't work. I mean, it could be, but it's not necessarily the best design. So behavior design is really about moving people to action. That's the core of where it is at. And when you start getting into that, you see that you basically have a huge Pandora's box. It's a simple thing, behavior, and to say it's just moving people to action, get people to move. But believe me, I've been thinking about this and working in this area for a decade and working in it for about 7 years now, and it's terribly, terribly hard. And I'll also go into why a little bit today. It's just that people are not predictable, people are not manipulable, which is a great thing. And also people have agency. But some of the areas that we need to think about when we try to think about behavior change and design are these. I wouldn't say that any of them is any less or more important than the others. You will have this as a recorded talk, so you'll be able to get back to this, and I can always mail you this if you need a copy. But yeah, I guess a lot of these are out of the scope of the conversation today, but I will I'll go a little bit into motivation. But the reason I'm showing you this today is because when I first started doing this work about 7 years ago, and I collected these bunch of tools, you could say, it was a very grab bag, very random approach that I had. So I would kind of go try to approach someone who had a project, or I would be working in a project as a consultant. And I would say, wow, I think we need to use habit and routine theory here, or we need to improve the triggers on this in this case, and maybe we can support decision making, or how about leveraging user emotion in this case? Are we rewarding our users currently? And what is the difference between incentives and rewards? Is there any difference at all? What kind of cognitive biases do our users or customers exhibit, and how might we overcome them? Personality types is a huge personality types, or as it's called, individual differences, is a huge area. The fact that different basically individuals react differently to the same situations. So nudging, choice architecture, gamification, I pretty much used all of these, but it has been very random over the years. But about 4 years ago, I realized that I needed a sort of a cohesive framework, a process to actually target and design behavioral interventions where I could use all of this, but then I had a clear starting point and I had a clear path into the process. And that's the reason I came up with the behavior design canvas. So since canvas-based tools ignore the green box in the middle, I'm sorry, that's for one step later in the talk. But really the canvas is a 3-part tool that I developed, and it's available for download for free on my website, and licensed under Creative Commons. And essentially what it does is it takes this chaotic process here of trying to figure out which theory or which model works for your particular case and turns it into a linear, more or less linear, process-based approach. And since canvases are visual, most people in every area of tech, innovation, design, startups are familiar with using canvases thanks to other canvases that came before. I said, why don't I come up with a canvas-based tool? So today I'd like to basically take you through an example of the usage of the canvas, and then show you, just basically take you through it. Yeah. So any questions so far? Yes. Julia said, I haven't got around to sending a request, but I thought about it. You see, that's again, how do you drive that behavior? And is it Julia's mistake or is someone else's mistake that they forgot to send me um, a request? No, I think it's the other way around. It's the interface, it's the product, it's the technology which should support us in helping us accomplish and do the things we want to do, right? So, any questions so far on
Yeah,
all of
Rajan, can you show me that slide again?
Yes.
Before, like where you mentioned that nobody sent you. Yeah. So from this, I have no like understanding that actually there is a desire for connecting with you on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so this
Yes.
this communicates me that there is a workshop,
Yes.
and if I'm interested, I could register from that link. That's a
Correct.
call for action. I can clearly see that.
Yes.
So the intention, even the intention of connecting with you, that's not clear at all. Like,
Exactly. And that's exactly my point is that there are all these interfaces sitting around which stare at people or which people stare at, which don't maximize the potential for usage. Because people did think about connecting with me, and LinkedIn is, after all, a network. So when you see something interesting happening, after all, only an impulse. It's the next thing that comes to your mind is, oh, could I don't know, connect with this person? And of course, it's a cultural thing. You might have cultures where people are a little bit slow to connect, and cultures where people immediately send an invite. Um, you see in conferences and some other places that people are just constantly networking every chance they get. They're like, what's your LinkedIn? Let's connect, your email.
yeah,
Because it's just a habit. So, but you're absolutely right. The whole screen here is biased towards displaying the event rather than facilitating the next natural step, which is where, if I had to advise LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn is just terribly, terribly designed. I mean, and Facebook as well. Basically, from a behavioral design point of view, uh, the problem with this whole the success of a product is the moment it becomes successful, their owners they're afraid to change things because they're afraid they will lose users. And that's the reason why you find, Facebook and LinkedIn and all of these guys just remaining exactly the same. They do not get better once they just get better very marginally. They just keep on optimizing and optimizing. So anyways, but and this is kind of the work I'm trying to do also within companies. So a lot of the work I do is actually just evangelize this whole thing called behavioral design, try to point out to customers, to business owners that, hey, there are so many opportunities to make a product better by understanding user behavior and by tapping into it and by extending it. And then how might we do that? All right. I can jump to any part. I'll start going into the behavior design canvas. There's still a little bit of theory in this one. So, well, at an overview, I have a video on my website, and I can also tell you more. I have another talk actually somewhere, but at an overview level, I just want to go through this quickly, is that at the high level, you really have the first phase where you're trying to get very specific about the desired behavior, or what we call the target behavior. And the target behavior is, what would you like the human being to actually do? Doing is the key, right? But uh, the user, the human, the customer, what have you, if your end beneficiary, if it's an NGO or an um, impact organization, non-profit organization, the end human is not doing any behavior in a vacuum. They typically are already doing something that you would like them to replace your target behavior with. So mapping the present behavior of your target customer, what does the human currently do, to what target behavior would we like the human to do, is terribly critical. In fact, this is just a small, it's just a bunch of text, and it looks so simple, but really I help companies over months sometimes, not necessarily working full time, but evolving towards the right target behaviors. You have some teams that immediately know what target behaviors they want, and other teams that actually take a long time to figure it out, especially in more internal organizational transformation or complex B2B product design work, etc. So the target behavior, you could get there understanding things like the business goal, like how you're trying to actually make money. So what kind of behaviors do you want to drive? You could also get there through understanding the revenue model better. Are you trying to capture data? Are you trying to, I don't know, drive usage? Are you subscription based? Are you freemium based? Are you, pay upfront or something else or just free? And of course, this is the key behavioral change that you're trying to make, is the shift between the current to the target behavior. And finally, you have to think deeply about users. So this is clearly a design thinking domain. Behavior design definitely is inside the world of design thinking, and I come from that world as well. And user insight is always critical, understanding human beings in a particular context and why they do what they do. All of that feeds into this part, the first part. Then you have the second part where we start getting into a little bit of behavioral science. There's actually about 5-6 models of behavioral science embedded into the canvas from all of these, all of these areas. I kind of pulled out what I thought was kind of critical and usable and kind of turned it into this. So here we try to look at motivation. The key idea behind motivation is this. Yes, you want people to do something. We want people to do something, but what is it that they want to do? So you have to align what people already want to do, what motivates them, to what we want them to do, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. Motivation is like the wind in your sails of action. People are already driven to do something to better their lives, to make progress, to learn a language, to make a living, to raise their kids, what have you. All we need to do is tap into that energy, and therefore the second box is aimed at doing that, which is the human motivated to do the target behavior? And if they are, then you need to amplify their ability to do it. Now, this box itself has changed in the last few weeks. I'm actually I'm adding agency here as well, highly important, because ability and agency are not exactly the same thing. They're actually quite different. But in general, we can say that you need motivation, but then you also need to have the ability to actually do that behavior before you can kind of shape that behavior. And in the cases where there is no motivation, you actually need to amplify that motivation. You need to bring motivation up. And this is a completely different case. So an example I like to take quite a lot is the kind of sorting trash problem, or I don't know, driving in a bike lane problem, right? If you want to move your city towards more and more bike-friendly city center, let's say, you will find people who are probably motivated to drive in bike lanes. And for them, you just need to design bike lanes, give them the ability, give them signage, clear signage, wide enough bike lane, I don't know, clear, what do you call, reflectors, good design, maybe a nice grip surface, whatnot. Make it easy for them to do that behavior because they already have the motivation to do it. But there may be others who are not motivated to ride in bike lanes. They think, nah, I'll just cut across. I'll not necessarily stick to the rules. You need to change those people's attitude. You need to persuade them. You might even need to gamify that experience. And so gamification comes in at a very specific stage. It's not just something you throw at any behavior design challenge. Let's gamify this, let's gamify that. No, it comes at a particular point. It comes out of a certain need. So in that case, in the case of bikers who don't want to bike in bike lanes and be nice, you have to use other strategies to amplify their motivation to bike in a bike lane and then give them the ability to do it. That's the basic idea behind it. And finally, you have the shaping of the behavior itself, which comes typically from habit design. The idea is that most behaviors are not just actions. They are responses to some kind of a cue, which is either internal or external. The smell of coffee is a cue. It kind of pushes you to, if you like to drink coffee, it could push you towards or nudge you towards drinking coffee. Sometimes the need to sleep is a cue which comes from inside your body. Nobody from the outside is telling you to sleep, but you're feeling sleepy. That's an internal cue or an internal trigger. And then you actually need to, after you take the action based on the cue, you need to experience a reward. There needs to be a tangible experience, internal, external, psychological, physical, whatever, a reward that actually comes from taking this action, which you can relate to and say, aha, I went to sleep, I feel rested, therefore this cue of go to sleep was a good one, and therefore the likelihood of this behavior being done increases. So don't forget that this human here who wanted to bike, who's not motivated to bike, the question is, how do you reward them, right? Becomes interesting. You can change their attitude and you can persuade them, but unless you apply a reward strategy here, and that's so when they take the action of biking in the bike lane, they actually get a reward, and then the next time they actually pay attention to the cues to bike in a bike lane. That's how behavior change happens. So the canvas is just a very a tool. There it basically isn't anything else like this in the entire world, as far as I know, where a team can actually come together and strategically think about behavior change for their product. And that's the reason it exists. So I have a couple of examples. Yeah, and then I have a little task for you. Haha. This is a small example of human motivation, aligning with human motivation. When I first, on my website, I said, download the canvas. I had a form, a very short form. And I said, with this download, you consent to give us your email. So I kind of imposed that in the beginning. And then I said, let's do this. So when a user clicked on this, they went to the survey. But here you see in this interface, I have basically made it mandatory that they give us, to the user give me their email in order to download my canvas. After some experimentation, I changed it to this and I said, well, this is the last question. So here I removed this. Now it's just, let's do this. You go in, you answer a few questions. And then in the end, it says, sweet, drop your email if you'd like to be in the loop, right? And the person's name shows up here. So this becomes optional. Actually, this is to me a much more powerful thing, because now now I'm aligning with the user's motivation. There's a small percentage of users who don't give their email anymore. But actually, you'd be surprised, a large number of people give their email because they are motivated to stay in the loop. They want to be part of the community. They want to probably receive my newsletter or updates or whatever. So enabling users to do what they want to do rather than forcing them. That's like one example of aligning with motivation, and therefore understanding human motivation in a particular context is super important. Now I have a small task for you to do. And I want to show you another example of aligning with motivation and actually behavior design, right? So this is now your task. You have 2 minutes. Basically, you need to send me a LinkedIn invite. It's up to you. It's optional. You don't have to. But if you like what you've seen so far and you'd like to connect with me, please send me a LinkedIn invite. You have like 2 minutes.
You are already on my LinkedIn, Ashwin.
Okay, great. This is Namrata. Hey, what's up? I recognize your voice. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think soon we will be able to do this also. We are building on this now.
Cool. All right. Evelyn has sent me. Anyone else? LinkedIn. Again, it's totally optional. Just a few minutes. Cool. Anastasia. Minutes. Nice to connect. Excellent. No stress. Actually, their LinkedIn now. Some sent it some time ago. And this is one case where essentially I just used a trigger. I literally triggered you right now. I hoped I was aligned with your motivation to connect because you've seen some of my presentation and you possibly wanted to connect with me. And I triggered you to take a target behavior, which is sent me a LinkedIn invite, and potentially you have a reward in your mind from this behavior that, hey, it would be nice. Long has sent me a invite. That's fantastic. So you potentially have a reward in mind from this. This is the first case. Let's look at an alternative case. What if I said, send me a LinkedIn invite but you have to add one word to it. It's basically your feedback. You can either choose which means sketch, you're not really sure, or you can say okay, which means, well, it was okay, nothing impressive, but not too shitty. Or you could use sweet, or then wow, right? So I'm hypothetical case, same thing. Send me a LinkedIn invite, but use one word in my LinkedIn. This may seem like a small change, but actually it's a massive change because you now get stuck in this dilemma. Your LinkedIn has your name there. So are you actually okay sending me a LinkedIn invite and saying or okay? So it's like, that's not a great start for our relationship. You've just watched my talk and now you're giving me honest feedback that it's just, well, it's okay. And maybe in order to overcome that feeling of discomfort, you might just be nice to me and say sweet. Oops, where am I? Yeah, you might just say sweet, right? So, or you might even say wow. So as you can see, small, tiny changes in how we design behaviors between case to case can drive real huge differences in behavior itself. They might change what people actually end up doing. And that's the reason being very careful about the details and actually experimenting with different cases becomes very important. So I want to go into actually one example here and actually break down the canvas for you using this example. This is because people usually ask me when I show them the canvas, how do you use it? And I want to spend the rest of my talk discussing this example, a couple of other examples, and then kind of end with the context of use, the different situations in which the canvas can be used as a tool. So here, this is an typical upgrade splash screen for a publication called Quartz. It's qz.com. They do some excellent reporting in journalism. And if you can see what's happening, it says, become a member to help build the future of Quartz. That's the call to action, or that's the appeal. And then there's the usual, try it for free. You can cancel. Then you have these, what does it do? The benefits of. And very interestingly here, you have see plans and pricing, okay? And they're asking you for an email here. They could have said see plans of pricing, and on the pricing page, they could have converted you. They could have asked you for your email. So why this particular set of decisions? We just want to analyze it. There is no right or wrong answer. But if you try to break this down into the behavior design canvas, we start here and we say, well, the desired behavior is basically to become a member. That's the key driver. You want the user to become a member. The current behavior is that users are browsing for free. You want to make this main behavior change. Very good. Then we start looking at the user intent. So this user insight here, this huge long piece, this becomes so important because the deeper you understand your user's motivations, especially users' motivations by their segment, the better user insights you have, the better you can do this part, which is aligning the motivation of the user with the target behavior. Yeah. Is the human motivated to do the target behavior? Well, we don't know, but we do know that because this world is full of misinformation and crap, basically, on the internet, really low quality journalism, you have a segment of users who actually are willing to support and spend money on good journalism, solid journalism, right? That's a pretty strong insight we have into the motivations of our users. They want to support great journalism. And then you have also others who may not have the motivation. So I'm sorry, this arrow here, just don't think about it. Actually, these two are related, but they're not the same thing. They're two different cases. So you have some users who want to support journalism and others who don't. They may be browsing for free. You want them to become a member, but then they don't necessarily have a key motivation. And the problem there is, how do you motivate them? My point here is, we've used this strategy in some cases where we've studied the motivations of existing users and tried to use that as a strategy to persuade other users. And I think this example here, become a member to help build the future of Quartz. Invest in us, be part of our journey, help us build an awesome future together. It's not just become a member and get all this cool stuff, right? There's more to this messaging here. It's a deeply crafted, well thought out message. So I think that's what's going on, is that they're trying to persuade you to say, build the future with us, and in that way increase the motivation, which then leads you to do a micro behavior, making it very easy. So always remember, ability, once you have enough motivation, you need to make it as easy as possible for the user to do the target behavior in order to move them closer towards the behavior change, right? And if I had said here, if I had put the number here, if these guys had put the number, the barrier to actually buying it becomes a bit higher. It's like, okay, then you start thinking about it. So what they really want is your expression of interest, and then they want you to move forward in the process and actually get closer to doing the target behavior of conversion. And that's why here they're trying to get you, the ability box is about trying to get you to see the plans and pricing, or increasing the ease to buy. And I'm taking a typically business example because this is a business audience. And you see, what happens is, when we have clarity on how we want to amplify ability, the target behavior becomes more and more clear. So the point I want to make here is that the canvas is not something that's strictly filled in a linear format. I mean, it gives you this sort of process to behavior change, but also it's a sort of dynamic framework where, depending on what you put here, something else might get adapted here and changed, and so on. So we arrive at this sort of very micro behavior of, well, the desired behavior is to get people to see plans and pricing. And if you're able to actually statistically test this through A/B testing, for example, and actually show that people who see plans and pricing tend to convert more, and probably even tie that to a segment or to a location and say, women between ages 24 and 32 on an iPhone, on iOS, they tend to convert so much percentage more when they see plans and pricing. So that's how behavior design kind of breaks down through experimentation and into product design. So that's basically the first two parts. And then finally, you get into shaping the behavior itself. This is always a longer conversation. And mind, guys, I do this workshop, I do this kind of over a day, sometimes 2 days. And we do several versions of canvases. This is a very light and fast version, just to give you an idea. So a lot of it may not immediately be like the best answers here, but basically this is how it works. And the reason we don't know what exactly the cue to the target behavior here is that, yes, C plans and pricing, that's the cue here. See the cue to buy here yet. And there are these interesting buttons here, which I don't think anybody ever sees. That's again slightly poor design. Oh, I'm so sorry, it's my mouse doing that. I'll just use my trackpad. Yeah. So these are interesting. No one ever sees them, I think, and they probably could think of making this better. What's that supposed to do? So the cue is not very clear. What's the trigger? The action is very clear. In this case, it's C plans, and then the reward. Well, what do you get? The reward, there is some information here about the rewards, but also when I actually make the purchase, I would like to see, possibly like to see this reward here reinforced. I would like to be told again that you're now in awesome company that reads, some of the best readers in the world are now reading this publication, right? That's one, example of usage of the canvas. I only have one last piece. So this is just a few minutes. Basically, when you take the canvas, this is what it looks like. I really recommend printing it out large, sticking it on a wall, and using Post-its. These are actual Post-its. So as you can see, you can fill in quite a few Post-its per box. And you could even print this larger, but typically this works very well in a team setting where you have your behavior canvas on the wall and teams can constantly iterate and brainstorm on how they should align motivation, what is the desired behavior, what are the rewards, the triggers, whatnot, and start applying more and more insight and theory. And it works very well in a studio setting. It can be applied in various situations. I've used it, for example, within journeys like this, where basically the organization has a certain view of the journey. We want to market, value proposition, registration, training. It's a sort of a service journey, but the user journey is quite different. And the idea was, how do we map these two and see what the differences are? How can they be made better? And for example, if the target behavior here was to enable learning, we possibly could use the canvas there. It can be used in a very micro way. This is a process of another user journey process, systems thinking process from a consultancy called Dark Matter Labs. I'm a huge fan of their work. They do very interesting large-scale systemic change, service design, challenges for the new century. Just brilliant. And here, if you see, there's all of these layers of a system, and behavioral changes need to possibly happen on so many micro levels. So this user, this stakeholder here probably needs to make a behavior change in order for the process to move forward. And an entire canvas can be done just on one node like this. It can be, it's literally for designing behavior at the individual level. Or again, from Dark Matter Labs, I just love their graphics because they're all open source. So again, this is a systemic map where they're trying to look at, various layers in a clean cities project. And if you need to have a many-to-many smart contract, obviously you're looking at many users on one side and many users on the other. What are those behavior changes those users need to do? And you could apply the canvas there. So that's it, really. I just wanted to show you a few examples. And finally, last but not least, I have the canvas. I've been using it online on Google Jamboard. So this is really convenient to have a digital canvas, and teams can now remotely start plugging their thoughts and working on their behavior change projects. So, yep, and I'm kind of in the process of trying to build a SaaS product on top of it. That's it for today, guys. At least my talk is over. Yeah. And happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ashwin. It was really informative session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. I also wanted to say that it was very interesting, and I especially liked your point on kind of the psychological effects that people have to make decisions. But now you've been kind of mentioning, or at least I heard that we kind of went through this behavior design, like related to technology companies like LinkedIn, Facebook, and like what would you kind of recommend to those who are maybe in a different field, like let's say someone who is maybe doing a kind of like a, or maybe selling something online, or yeah, let's say like an e-commerce person. What would you recommend to them, like how to start or how to become like behaviorally driven?
Yes, that's a really good question. Well, actually, a part of the theme of the talk was also that organizations need to be more behaviorally driven, and that's kind of exactly what I mean. Well, it depends on where is the site of behavior change, right? I mean, that's the key, I think, for me. If you're working in an e-commerce setup, this is a very different. What you have on the screen is a very different world to an e-commerce world, for example. This is an entire system that's mapped on a graphic, right? But if you look right here within this, let's say 100%, building, oh yeah, let's say this is food waste platform, or food management, right? If right here, inside this food management system might be an e-commerce service for food, right? To order your food, groceries for the month, okay? I'm just saying that the canvas itself or behavior change itself works on all levels. In a typical e-commerce situation, you already have your metrics, your pilot metrics. You're trying to go through these stages of, well, awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, referral, retention, revenue, and referral, right? Are you familiar with the R metrics?
Yeah, I heard of it.
Yes, okay, yeah. Typical e-commerce type funnel of going from acquisition to conversion and retention. So each of those actually are a set of behavior changes. And pretty much what much commerce type situation, right? You want someone who's browsing the website to actually buy your product or show you consideration for buying, intent of buying. So you map that here. Then you try to understand if their motivation is actually aligned to buying, which is the target behavior. And in many cases, you'll see that, especially in China, for example, or I think in Asia, especially in China, e-commerce purchasing happens in a very different sort of world than we are used to here, where they're looking at hundreds of products, bookmarking a lot of products, buying stuff very randomly, shopping at like 11:30 in the night, and so on. Very spontaneous because the delivery costs are so low and the costs of the products are so low. So is the user just looking at your product? Is the motivation just to save it for later reference? Or is it to actually purchase? What is the intent? Figure that out. And then, either give them the ability to make the purchase or then actually change their perception or persuade them to make a purchase.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have one question.
Yes, please.
Because I'm studying marketing, so I want to ask, like, so how does behavior design canvas that can affect the marketing department? And like in an organization, which department should do this type canvas?
You asked me a golden question. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you asked me the killer question. Basically, in other words, you're saying who owns behavior? And the current answer is nobody. That's the problem, but it's going to change. How should marketing apply it? Well, they should apply it exactly like the way I said. For example, that try to, this for example is a piece of marketing, isn't it? This is a piece of online marketing. And thinking about this from a behavioral perspective is one way to apply it. You know, this is a piece of marketing basically, where it's trying to get me to upgrade based on my readership, and that's a very similar kind of a target behavior like the one did previously. That's also a marketing problem. Yeah. So marketing and product are starting to merge more and more. And marketing happens inside the product. It happens while you're using the product. It happens before and after. So these lines are blurring. And growth is also coming into that space. So how should marketing think about it? Well, they should first of all recognize that behavior design and behavior change is needed. And then they should take ownership for it, which is the last missing piece, which is not yet there. Because when I, for example, get hired by companies to do this work, a chief marketing officer may hire me, a CEO may hire me, a head of product may hire me. And their goals are to, either increase the revenue or increase the effectiveness of the product, increase customer satisfaction, whatever. But no one actually has a goal of actually changing behavior. No one has that as a key metric, and that's something that we're trying to change. So who is the behavioral owner in the organization? There isn't anyone right now. And that's the big change which has to come. There has to be an owner for behavioral change. It could be owned by somebody who right now owns the marketing responsibility, or is a product owner but also responsible for behavior. That's a good first step, but that first step has to happen. Next question.
I actually, meanwhile, your talk, I sent a message to the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about that message? Was that kind of behaviorally driven, or like,
Which
actually,
message?
now that I'm looking at it, it's really terrible. I sent a message with anonymous feedback about this event,
Mm-hmm.
And then the link, but it really doesn't kind
No,
of call to action.
exactly. It's not actionable. I love it. That's exactly the consciousness that I'm trying to create in you. That's exactly my point. Anonymous feedback about this
now
event.
that I've been kind of
Is
like
it
looking
available
at
there? Yeah. Is it available there? Can I give it there? What can I do? What am I supposed to do about it? So exactly.
Yeah.
So Daniela says, how would you measure the key metric for behavioral change? That's a brilliant question. Well, if you look at the canvas, the key metric itself comes here, right? It comes as a function of the desired behavior. And it comes as, the even more specific key metric would be the action right here. But the true answer is that it really depends. So if you take the example of bike lanes, yeah, bike lanes is a good example. Getting users to bikers to ride in bike lanes, if that's the behavior change that we want. I can also take should I take a business example? Okay, I'll take a business example. Let's take the example of e-commerce. So your key metric is, of course, on e-commerce, it's the amount of revenue, right? It's the earnings that you've sold, or sorry, the earnings at the end of the quarter or end of a fiscal. That's one metric. But the behavioral metric to drive that metric could be actually several. And that's why there isn't, the key metric is always typically a business metric, and you could attach one behavioral metric to the key business metric and say purchases is a key metric, of course. So on Amazon, the number of book purchases directly drives the revenue metric. So that's a key. Purchases is a key behavioral metric. It's what users do. But then there might be a whole bunch of other key metrics which actually support that final key metric, which is number of books added to favorites, number of books viewed, number of books commented on, number of books shared. And now, of course, Amazon has a Kindle reader for the desktop. I don't know if you tried it, or for the mobile phone. It's fantastic. It's really nice because it lets you highlight little snippets from a book. You can actually highlight inside this digital book, and it shows you who else, like how many other people, I'm sorry, have highlighted it. So you can see the most highlighted parts of the book anonymously. You don't see the other users. But if you highlight a lot through the book, and if you've progressed and you spent time inside the book a lot, okay? So there's book A, I'm a reader. It's a book on behavior. I have gone through the whole book, and that I can detect through analytics. And I've highlighted a lot, and I have pretty much visited every page. So it shows that the intensity of my reading through the book is very high. And then when I look at another book on behavior written by the same author, maybe the data tells me, I mean, all of my behavior in the current book tells Amazon that my likelihood of purchase for the next book are pretty high, right? Especially if I have PayPal, or if my credit card is validated that, okay, this guy actually has money, then those signals are very strong key metrics of my likelihood to buy the next book by that author. So you see what I'm trying to say? Since you can you can triangulate on a particular behavior through many data points, it's not the target behavior is obvious. The final key metrics typically obvious. Get users to drive in the bike lane. Okay, get users to buy more books. Get users to shop more at Kmarket. Get users to volunteer more time at their local NGO. It could be nonprofit, for-profit, online, offline, whatever. The final key metric for a behavior is not that hard. It's the target behavior itself, but it's the immediate next set of metrics. What are those enabling behaviors, enabling signals, which make that final behavior happen? That's where the work and all of the magic is about. That's where it happens.